Bob was one of the first. Bob was with us from almost the beginning. We put an ad in Pittsburgh to hire a new salesman, and Bob answered that ad. And as I was talking to him and finding out that he was from Newcastle, and I said to him, I said, well, do you mind, are you going to mind driving down to Pittsburgh every day to go to work? And he says, well, no, he says, you have an office in Youngstown, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm going to come to work there. And I said, well, that's great, but we're not hiring in Youngstown right now. We're hiring in Pittsburgh. And he said, well, that's fine. He said, well, I'll still come to work for you in Youngstown. And I said, well, but we're not hiring in Youngstown. We're hiring in Pittsburgh. And he says, well, yeah, that's fine, but I'm going to come to work for you in Youngstown. And so now I thought I was on the phone with some crazy guy. And I said, okay, well, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. And then I hung the phone up and said, wow, that was weird. And then he called me the next day and said, I didn't hear back from you. And I said, now I got to meet this guy.
First of all, Bob is a very kind, generous, loving, old school person, which I was drawn to that because being raised by my dad's very old school, so it just kind of reminded me of my dad.
He just never, he was a great person, and he didn't expect things from anybody, and he was very, very, very happy when, whenever you did anything for him. He was very amazed.
And so I had Bob come in, and I loved him, and I hired him right on the spot. And he was great for our company from that day forward. And the funny thing is that he kept a copy of that ad that I had in the newspaper in his wallet forever. He carried it with him all the time.
And also, he used to send out thank you cards. I was very impressed by that. He would send out thank you cards whether he sold the appointment or if he didn't. He always sent out a thank you card, handwritten and mailed every single appointment. And it's really hard to talk about Bob because I looked up to him. Him and Rose were two of the most wonderful people, and they were so perfect for each other. And I can remember coming out to Canfield Fair with him every single time he had to work, and she would sit there and while he worked and did her crafts or whatever, and it just reminded me how Fred and Lucy are, because they're always together, and Rose and Bob were always together, and that's someone definitely to look up to. And I miss him dearly. I miss him so much. And I just love you, Bob.
And Bob had a milestone birthday, and we got him a cake. We all met in the conference room, and he walked in and he was like, is all this for me?
Bob Lawton, great guy. I remember when he first came to work for us, I think he was like 70 years old, and I was actually the person who trained him out in the field. Of all the salespeople who would show up for meetings or anything, events that we had that involved Window, he was always the first one there. He's just a kind-hearted person, and we miss him dearly.
So I really miss Bob. I miss Bob's starched white shirts. I miss seeing him with the coffee area, saying time to get some motion lotion, and his contagious positivity that he just had with everybody. I've never really met anybody quite like Bob, and I probably won't meet anybody in the future like him. He just was the most positive, reassuring, kind person that I know, and I just really miss him.
I remember when I made the decision to come back to Winter World, one of the people I was really nervous about, whether he was going to think that I should be here or not was Bob Lawton. And at the same time, Bob was kind of easing his way out. He was reluctantly retiring, didn't really want to do that. But I remember I had a conversation with Bob, and I said, Bob, how do you feel about me coming back to be the sales manager? And he said, I'm delighted. And it was like my father said it. It felt so good to hear that from Bob.
I talk about Bob all the time. And I always told him, I said, you know, Bob and his wife, if I had to say a word that described them, it would be classy.
He was district governor, Rotary Club of Newcastle, and he had so many good memories of all the things that he had done. And he had gotten involved with Boardman. We had him into Boardman once, I know. I brought him in as a guest, and everybody was really glad to see Bob. They were glad to be introduced to Bob.
They were the classiest people. You know, Bob was the head district for Rotary? Governor, district governor for Rotary. That's a big deal. And Bob owned his own company. He before he came to work for me, he owned his own company. And what Bob told me was, I retired, but I couldn't stand it. I hate being retired, so he came back to work. And but getting back to classy, you know, just looking at Bob and Rose, they were always so classy. They dressed so nice, and they just looked the part. Classy people.
Obviously, anytime I went out with Bob on an appointment, 100% it was closed. It was closed before we got there because they were buying, because they wanted to buy from Bob. He's just as I said, when my father and Bob both died in the fall of last year, 2021. And I remember when Bob died, and when I went to the calling hours, I met his family, and again, it was almost like losing Dad all over again. Just a great guy.
Bob did a fantastic job for Window World. But now he's doing a fantastic job for the guy upstairs. There's no doubt in my mind. He's looking down on us saying, one of these days you'll be up here with me. And I'll be glad to see him then.
Bob always told me, he says, I'm going to do this until it's not fun anymore. But he never left. So it must have been fun. Miss you, Bob. Love you, Bob.